In our last lecture series, you recall that we made efforts to define climate change. I want to again advise that we take quality time and listen to the last lecture series. That's the foundation of what we are going to discuss here. And if we don't do that, we may find it difficult to get a good understanding of this particular session, because the center of this course is communicating climate change in agriculture. So we need to get every bit of it. So here we want to look at communicating climate change. At the end of this session, we expect that every candidate should be able to define communication. Extension professionals already should know what we mean by communication. So it shouldn't be difficult. We don't expect you to have any difficulty in defining communication. And then look at the elements of climate change communication. We're going to adapt the SMCR by Bello to look at elements of climate change communication. Then finally, we will be rounding off this particular session as we look at the challenges with communicating with rural people. What are the challenges in communicating with rural people? So we move off from here to define communication. How do we define communication? We define communication as a transfer of information, ideas, or messages from a sender to the receiver through a given channel. Pick it again. That is the information, idea, or messages that is transferred from a sender to a receiver. Once the message gets to the receiver, in an ideal communication model, the sender expects a feedback. But we will look at that details again when we get to the SMCR communication model. Now, what's the purpose of communication? The purpose of communication is to bring about a change in behavior, change in knowledge, change in skill of the receiver. There should be a new way of doing things, an improved approach to practice, an innovative way. In fact, what the extension officer transfers is what we call an innovation. An innovation is an idea that is perceived to be new by a potential user. For an innovation to be adopted and effectively utilized, recall in the first semester, we look at the characteristics of an innovation that will influence its adoption and implementation. Please go back to that particular session and listen very, very well. But the core purpose of communication is to bring about a change in skill, behavior, and knowledge. Communication can be effective or ineffective. Communication is effective when it brings about the change in line with the desire of the sender. So if the desire of the sender is fulfilled, then communication is effective. But if the change does not go in line with the desire of the sender, then the communication is ineffective. It's common in our domain to, you tell someone, please come, and the person is told to come keeps going his or her way and simply replies, I am coming. In that context, there is communication. Something is said, but the communication is not effective because there is no change in attitude, there's no change, in skill, in behavior of the receiver. It's only if the receiver now turns, towards you and start coming your way that one can now say that the communication is effective because there is a change in direction. So communication can be effective or ineffective. And there are several qualities, several issues that would determine if communication will be effective or ineffective. There are a whole lot of them, but we will be able to look at them maybe subsequently in our lecture series. We want to use the Bellows SMCR model to look at elements of communication. Here, there are the 4 core elements of communication, and then a 5th one, which wasn't part of Bellow's model, but as time passed with experience on the field, it became necessary to add that. The 4 elements in Bellow's communication model is the sender, the message, the channel, and the receiver. Who is the sender? The sender is the source. And what does it do? He encodes the message. He encodes the message. To encode means to prepare in a manner that it can be transferred. Now, what's the message? The message is the new idea. The message is this innovation we are talking about. The message is the new skill that we are expecting the farmer to adopt. In this case, since we're talking about climate change, a good message could be the climate smart agriculture, the adoption of climate smart agriculture. Or you can also be talking about the use of digital tools for climate smart agriculture. You can be looking at climate change adaptation and mitigation. You can be looking at climate change resilience. So these things can form the message. Now, it is the message that the sender will now transfer through a channel. A channel here could be the television, could be the radio, the magazines, the print media, of which the magazine is a part of, even the local town crier. There are several means, several channels of communication. You look at your audience. That's what we call the audience analysis. You look at your audience, look at the quality and capacity of your audience, and even the quantity, the coverage. What's the size of the persons you want to cover? That will now determine the channel. And at various stages of adoption, there are channels that best suit each stage. For instance, if you are doing awareness, you're creating awareness, it's advised that you use the mass media. The mass media like television, radio. But also in using your channel, just as we said, your channel must suit your audience. Here we're talking about the receiver. You don't go to CNN or BBC to advertise Faro 44 for farmers in Igbo. It's difficult for them to get that message. You don't do that. You can't even go to AIT or any of these popular national televisions to advertise the application of fertilizer for farmers at Ndufachara. They may not have access. Ndufachara may not be, farmers in Ndufachara may not easily have access to those big cable networks. So you will need to look at what channel suits your receivers. So then the receiver. The receiver here is the extension clientele. Our core clientele are the farmers. They are the major persons we focus on in our communication. We want to transfer information to the farmers. We want to help them develop their livelihood. We want to improve on their livelihood indicators like their health, infant mortality, child mortality, level of education, and other socio-demographic characteristics. So the receiver is the farmer. What the receiver does is to decode the message that the sender encoded and then create understanding. Subject to what he or she picks, there should be a feedback, because it's the feedback that would update the sender if the communication was effective or not. At the point of sending your feedback, the receiver one becomes the sender one, and the sender one becomes the receiver two. I just hope you understand that. Feedback means the final receiver will not be sending, while the initial sender will not be receiving. Every other element will remain same. So having looked at these elements of communication, the channel, the message, the sender, and the receiver, let's look at the challenges with communicating with rural people. That is the knowledge gap between what the extension know and what the farmers know. There is a wide knowledge gap of which the communicator, the extension officer must be very conscious of it. You know that climate change comes with so many um, professional peculiar terms. You hear buffer capacity, you hear adaptive capacity, you hear resilience, you hear climate financing, you hear digitalization. So there are several peculiar terms that come with climate change. So if you go to the field and begin to speak big jargons to the farmers, it may not be very easy for them to flow along with you, and that will become a very serious challenge. So knowledge gap. Look at impatience on the side of extension. You know extension wants a result, not just extension. Everybody wants a result as soon as possible, as early as possible. Nobody wants to get delayed results or delayed feedback. So sometimes when extension is not very conscious of the knowledge gap between the service they provide, not even the service they provide, between them as service providers and farmers as receivers, they may not be patient enough to wait, and that becomes a challenge. Then there is the issue of credibility gap. In our earlier session, we mentioned credibility gap. What we're saying is in credibility gap is that if extension keep teaching farmers and then with an expected outcome, and then farmers keep getting a different outcome from what extension must have earlier told them. And if the trend continues over time, you see a situation where the farmers will no longer trust extension. When we're discussing about climate change effects on agriculture, we highlighted this issue of credibility gap. Extension tries a new breed of cassava stain on their field, tries it in the farmer's field, gets good results, transfers to the farmer. Maybe this particular cassava variety will require 7 hours of sunshine, maybe every day to do fine. But with climate change, the variety is getting maybe less than 7 hours or more. The result comes out negative from what extension told the farmer. It happens in cassava, happens in rice, same thing in maize. Next time when extension comes to communicate, it becomes difficult for the farmer to flow along. So that's what we mean by credibility gap. That is, as this gap increases, it becomes difficult to communicate to the rural people. Then there is lack of motivation on the part of extension. Extension is poorly motivated, especially in Nigeria. Very poorly motivated. So with that low level of motivation, it becomes also a little bit difficult for extension to give in their all to climate change communication. One wonders why extension should be the one communicating climate change to farmers. So let's take a brief moment to let you know why extension communication of climate change is important. First of all, we've said earlier on that climate change is affecting farmers. And because it's affecting farmers, the major clientele, the major persons that extension patronize and patronizes extension, vice versa, is the farmers. So extension should be there to stand in for the farmers. Then, because the climate change is there with farmers, they need solutions. If the climate change experience is going on and the farmers are not interested in solution, extension wouldn't have come in. But because the changes are there and farmers are interested in solution, extension is expected to do something. Extension is there because in seeking solution, there is this credibility between extension and farmers of all agricultural agencies and all agricultural arms of agricultural um, business. Extension is the most credible for farmers, most reliable source. So because of that, it is this area where they have much reliability, much trust that they would likely go for solution. And then you also need to know that extension is trained to do this. Extension is trained to communicate with farmers, and you don't compare the outcome of communication from a trained professional with that of someone who is not trained. So farmers would prefer to go for extension communication, extension assistance to make gains from the training. And we have this training because we have the mandate. The training is there because we have the mandate. The mandate is because we've got the training. So extension will have to communicate climate change to farmers in line with the extension mandate. And finally, the extension is expected to bring connection to farmers in terms of solutions to their problems. It's only the extension that will likely make every effort to get solutions to farmers. Even when you complain to other persons, the other place you want to complain to, they will very much likely refer you back to the extension. So that is why climate change communication is sanguine seriously around agricultural extension. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your time. This is well appreciated. We'll wait for our next lecture series.